Finance, Customer Focus, Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we start, I need to go through the standard message I must read out, otherwise I will be dispatched with. But before we start these proceedings, may I bring to your attention that some housekeeping matters. There is no expected fire alarm testing today, therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please follow the signs to the nearest fire exit and meet at the fire assembly point outside Cafe Roma. A bit of plug there for that business in Civic Square. Please can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and that it's switched off when you're not using it. Mobile phones turned silent. And of course, you will be aware the meeting is broadcast live to the internet and there will be thousands of people watching online and will be capable of subsequent repeating viewing. By entering this room and during the course of the meeting, councillors and anyone else present are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. Excellent. Welcome, Councillor. Hannah, are there any apologies for today's meeting, please?
We haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you. It's noted that there are two members absent, so if the minutes could record that.
What I can do, Chair, is ask a colleague to call the two that are missing just to see if they're on their way.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect of the item on the agenda for today's meeting? If so, please show now. Thank you. Item number 3, the minutes. I'm sure members have read through these minutes. Very enjoyable read in relation to the meeting of the 28th September. Does anybody have any issues arising out of the minutes? Councillor Tui.
Yes, I find my name under apologies for absence, but I'd like to say I was here at the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. Subject to that amendment, Councillor Stoneman.
Thank you. Just in terms of the declaration of interest that I raised, it says in the minutes finding number worked for, it should be works for.
The reason that that's done that way is because the minutes are written in the past tense. So I understand what you're saying. I can adjust that, but that would have been why that's put that there. But we will review that one.
Thank you. If you could change it, as he is a employee of the council. Yeah.
Thank you. That's noted. Thank you, Councillor Tui. That will be amended. Any other observations in respect to the minutes? Okay, thank you. Subject to those, I'll sign a copy of those minutes as an accurate set, subject to those two amendments. Item number 4, Chair's urgent business. I have not been appraised of any such urgent business. That takes us to item number 5, which is the Finance Monitoring Report. Councillor Lowry, welcome to the meeting, and David Northey, Interim 151 Officer. Over to you, Councillor Lowry.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So as you said, this is the Revenue and Capital Monitoring Report that will be sent to full council next week. This is what's called period 6, quarter 2. So just to remind everybody, that's from the 1st of April to the end of September this year. So basically, we're at the halfway point, and some good news, which is seldom the case for me, I'm afraid, but there is a reduction in the overspend. The overspend forecast to the end of the financial year is now some £4.76 million compared to when I last reported to you at quarter 1, we were at £7.5 million. So progress is being made to ensure we have a balanced position at the end of the financial year. You won't be surprised to hear that many of the issues that I explained to you last time still exist, particularly in respect of children's services. You will see from the report there's a projected overspend of somewhere in the region of £6 million, and this equates to approximately 10% of the original budget, and it's not sustainable. We're working with our improvement partners in the Children's Services Transition Board, and which the Chief Executive chairs, to ensure that we get some further progress in understanding the issues and some assurance around the measures in place to do our very best to contain this overspend. You'll also be aware that I've reported in the past that there's a overspend in the region of some £2.4 million for homelessness, an overspend in what's called SEND transport, that's children with special educational needs, requiring home to school transport, and that's forecasting an overspend within the budget. And additionally, you will see from the report that the People's Directorate are reporting an overspend of some £3.7 million. The savings that I've referred to previously to reduce the forecast overspend are set out in the report. In addition to that, of course, this report also includes the capital monitoring position as of period 6. And you will see that the revised budget reflects an additional £18.6 million in financial year 23/24 and a further £18.2 million projections for the remainder of the period from 27 to 28. And those are included in Annex 1 of the report. I am currently working with officers to undertake a review of our capital programme to ensure its affordability. As you will be aware, interest rates have gone up considerably, so therefore any borrowing requirements going forward need to reflect the increase as a consequence of that rise in interest rates. So I will be meeting with officers and members to further review the capital programme to ensure its affordability going forward. So good progress in period. The capital programme element will go to full council next week for consideration and to be voted upon. And I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Anything to add, David?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, this is your opportunity now to engage with Councillor Lowry and David Northey in respect of the report before you, reporting on period 6. This is a standing agenda item. Councillor Lowry has pointed out the direction of travel. In summary, we are going in the right way, but still considerable ground to be made at period 6, the halfway point of the year. Notwithstanding, and I'm grateful, Councillor Lowry, I'm just giving members the opportunity to consider any questions. It should be noted that we will no doubt, as a full council, be discussing this outturn report on Monday, at Monday's full council meeting. And of course, we have budget scrutiny coming up in about 2 weeks, 6th and 7th of December, where we'll spend some 7 sessions over 2 days discussing next year's budget, which obviously our current financial position will have an impact on, bearing in mind that a lot of assumptions are made on our performance this year into the next financial year. So I pause there to allow any members to raise any questions without wishing to direct the debate at this stage. Thank you. Councillor Hendy.
There was a mention in the pack of a £900,000 business rate grant. Could you put a bit of light on that for us, please?
Yeah, that is quite a complex one, Councillor Hendy, in the sense that you'll remember a pandemic called COVID, and an awful lot of businesses weren't able to pay business rates as a consequence of that. And the government effectively paid the business rates to the council on behalf of those individuals that weren't paying it. And what we've done during this period of time is gone back to central government, explained to them the deficit and the payments they've made, and there was still an outstanding deficit to the council to the tune of £900,000, and we've written to government and they've accepted that, and they've now made that payment to us.
Councillor Gosling.
Thank you very much, and just to congratulate the financial team on reducing the shortfall. It's here where it would have been useful again to have highlighted the change in variance over the last report, so that we can see what changes have been made and the detail of those changes, where these the variance has been reduced over the different budgets. So would it be possible to have that included in the next report when we get here? So not only an indication of the forecast net variance, but also the change in the forecast net variance from the previous report.
I'll take that one, Chair, and I will apologise. I did make that commitment at the last meeting. I do apologise. I will make sure that comes through.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Under just clarification, really, under customer and corporate services, there's a reference, revenue moved to capital £500,000. Could you just clarify what that actually means, please?
Okay, so we have a revenue budget, which we're talking about today, and additionally we have a capital programme, which we're also talking about. So the two are like two separate bank accounts. So if we were undertaking works on doing a pothole, for instance, which is a good example, that would come out of your revenue budget, okay? If you were building a new road, that would be a capital expenditure, okay? But there are times when we undertake projects on behalf of ourselves or government where the money is £10 million, but a portion of it is revenue and the majority of it is capital. And sometimes it's very difficult to entirely understand which bit's revenue and which bit's capital. So the team have done an assessment in reviewing the project it is undertaking to ensure that it's charging the right money to the right bank account. And obviously it's preferential for us to ensure that we make that as accurate as possible to ensure we put as much money onto the capital programme and thereby relieving the revenue programme as much as possible. Does that make sense?
Councillor Stevens.
Thanks, Chair. Again, with the directorate by directorate list there, under corporate and council-wide, you've mentioned a variance of 500,000 and the heading is Treasury Management, and that's something we usually hear about at the Audit and Governance Committee. So can you perhaps take us through what's meant here, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stevens. So people very often get confused because, like, why have you got any money when you're always pleading poverty type thing? Well, so if you were to take council tax, for instance, or wages for schools, that money gets paid into our bank account before we actually get to spend it. And when we spend it over a 12-month period. So the money that's being sat in our bank account, we actually put it to work, like we all do with our own saving accounts. You know, we try to optimise that and get an interest rate, the highest interest rate possible. Equally, there's always a buffer. So you hear us talking about reserves. Well, those reserves equally have to sit in a bank account. And what we do with those reserves, we ensure we get the best interest rate for them, or sometimes make an investment on them. And the team in the Treasury Management Department have done some good work again, and therefore they've made a surplus over and above what they expected to make in that department, and thereby able to release £500,000 to the revenue budget to assist in providing services.
That's really helpful, and put it in those sort of simple terms that us non-financial experts can understand is really good. I mean, this is an example then of our money working for us and then going on to fund services later on. Sounds like a double win.
Yes, it is a double win, but you'll also be aware that interest rates going up does have a negative impact elsewhere, as I mentioned. So therefore, as a council, we do borrow considerable sums of money, and the interest going up from effectively 0 to 5% now. In fact, the Public Loan Work Board is in excess of 5%, David, from memory. That makes it more costly for us to borrowing. Hence, of course, it's important that we do a review of all our borrowing requirements to ensure that actually they are able to sort of cover that cost of interest rates.
Through you, Chair, if I just add to that as well, you're absolutely right. It is the governance from Audit and Governance Committee that looks at Treasury Management as a sort of separate issue. And at the next meeting, which is coming up towards the end of the month, so the papers will be published fairly soon, is the half-year review report looking back on the 6 months, and you will see in that report the detail of where the 500,000 came from.
Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you. It's just a follow-up from the previous question about the revenue move to capital. Thanks for the analogy, but what revenue stream is that that's moved to capital? Exactly.
Sorry, Councillor, I can get you the detail if you like, but I haven't got that with me. But it'll be, it's not one particular project. It's probably going to be a list of 10,000 here and 20,000 there.
A big list of various projects.
Thank you. I think that comes back to Councillor Gosling's point about sort of blow-by-blow moments throughout the quarter? Thank you.
I accept Councillor Goslin's entirely right. It is appropriate that we show the variance in period. We, particularly myself, have tried to be as transparent as possible. You know, I could give you a breakdown of that £500,000, but it would be probably a whole page of various projects. And if we do that for each and every aspect, then this report would probably be a reasonably sized document. You need to give yourself the assurance, I get that. You know, David has said he's very happy to send you that data if you need it, which is fine. But it's about the quantum of stuff you need, and there's an element of, you might not trust me as a politician, but you have got the 151 officer here who should be able to give you that assurance.
No, I appreciate that. It's a balancing act. Don't get me wrong. It's just it's a case by case basis. But when it's £500,000, yeah, a little breakdown would be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, and I'm sure Councillor Ricketts would follow that up by saying he trusts you implicitly as a politician also. Isn't that right, Councillor Ricketts? Yeah. Super. Any other questions? I don't have any other speakers on my list. Councillor Lowry, if I may, I very much repeat Councillor Goslin's observation, and congratulations to David and team for the direction of travel and the progress made. I think Jeremy is absolutely right in acknowledging that. When we last discussed the gap, you will recall I and other members pressed on, is the situation going to get any better soon? And the response from both you and David was, well, it's going to get, particularly in respect to children's services, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think the view was also held of the People Directorate, it would get worse before it gets better. But I recall the comment being attributed to Children's Directorate. But in respect to people, that position at period 6, we are exactly, there's been no movement. And the position in terms of the Children's Directorate, that's getting worse, which coincides with the comment, which the precursor to that. Whilst it's great that you anticipated that, so well done on the forecast, what I want to see is, have we peaked? So we've got worse. Have we peaked, or is it going to continue getting worse? And the follow-up question I'll share with you now is, obviously we're 6 months in. Is there sufficient time to recover if we haven't peaked or we have peaked? So that's my question. Have we peaked and is there sufficient time to recover?
In respect of children's services, we don't entirely know at this stage at the moment. There is a improvement board that's chaired by the Chief Executive. You'll be aware that there's an external commissioner appointed to assist us. There's been an awful lot of work. We had a presentation last week on the progress to date. There is a tremendous amount of progress, but there are still a number of key issues outstanding. So I would not like comfortable in saying to you here and now that the Children's Services Department is still not going to see a further deterioration in period. What that should show us at some stage is, yes, that deterioration has continued, but there is actually light at the end of the tunnel in respect it will start to readdress itself. Some of the other areas that I've raised today in respect of adult social care, as you said, there's no change in period. You're having a presentation shortly on understanding what measures we're taking in respect of homelessness, and of course there's further work to do on sane transport. But those key areas are really being very much focused on at the moment. I can assure you they're keeping both David and I awake at night, making sure that we're doing our very best to get to a balanced position at the end of the financial year. I am comfortable to say that I'm confident that we will get to that position, but there is still some concerns about children's services.
I think Councillor Larry's summed up very well. I think I said at the last one, and you sort of reiterated that, the children getting worse before it gets better, but that's the nature of getting to the bottom of what the issues might be in that directorate, isn't it? Councillor Larry's made the point, we're at the half-year stage now, so there's still 6 months to run. I always get nervous if I come back with the Q3 report with anything approaching 2 million, so I'm confident that we're we should be able to come back probably around the 1 to 1.5 million, which to me gives us a sort of a clear landing then into year end as spend slows down and so on. So I'm still confident that we will get to the position we need to be by the end of the year. There will be ups and downs across the directorates, but we'll overall get there.
I'm somewhat reassured by your confidence, both of you, and we will continue scrutinising at this committee. But as I said, when we open this agenda item, we'll no doubt debate this further at full council next week, and budget scrutiny, for those who are joining us on the two-day budget scrutiny, we will no doubt have that in the forefront of our minds when we're trying to set or scrutinise next year's budget. In the absence of any other questions, the recommendation is that the committee notes the forecast revenue monitoring position at period 6, as set out in the report, in the sum of 4.766 million. The capital budget 23 to 28 is revised to 629.924 million, as shown in Table 1, and recommend these amendments to full council for approval. Yes, are we all content with that recommendation? I'm grateful, thank you. The next agenda item is homelessness, agenda item number 6. Councillor Penberthy, welcome. Jackie and Matt, very much welcome. And this is your paper to introduce. Councillor Penberthy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Homelessness in Plymouth is at an all-time high, with record amounts of people approaching the council for housing support. Not only are there more families living in temporary accommodation, including bed and breakfast, but the length of time they're without a permanent home is increasing too. We're living through a perfect storm of national pressures, like the cost of living crisis, high interest rates, and the long economic shadow of the pandemic. How all of these are having an effect on households, many of whom are working, ending up seeking help with homelessness. There isn't actually any dressing it up. The national picture is grim, and we have a significant housing crisis on our hands nationally, and you'll hear local councils all over the country talking about the impact it has on them. And we're seeing that playing out here in Plymouth as well. And quite simply, there's no magic wand that we can wave. So we're having to be imaginative. We're having to come up with fresh ideas. We're having to directly intervene to increase the provision of service, both in terms of resource and temporary accommodation. The work is slowly starting to slow the tide, but like anything that requires a building, a house, or something new to happen, lead-in times aren't quick, especially when we consider the pressures that the private rented sector is also under at the moment. And so we are doing what we can there, but we need to become more radical. The Homelessness Recovery Board has been set up in the face of the pressures facing households across the city. The partnership initiative to not only try and stop homelessness in the first place, but also help people out of temporary houses and into permanent homes. And I think increasingly prevention is becoming important there. I think it'd be worth saying that one of the things that is making prevention difficult is that the local housing allowance cap has been frozen since 2020. And I understand even at senior government member levels, lobbying is happening to the Prime Minister and the Treasury to get that changed. The local housing allowance should mean that a third of private rented sector properties are within reach of people in receipt of benefits, and the vast majority of people on universal credit in the city are in work. So we're talking about the working poor being able to afford accommodation. The report you've got today shows that actually that's not the case by any stretch. And since the figures in the report have come, we're probably now at a point where there's no rented property in the city within the local housing allowance framework. That means it's really difficult to find accommodation. The knock-on effect at the other end of the market is that housing providers need the local housing allowance to get their mortgages to develop new properties. Without that local housing allowance having gone up, they have a viability gap because they're not able to borrow against that difference in their rental income. In terms of the way that banks and other lenders work out their income. So that is slowing down the provision of new affordable housing at the point where we need it to speed up. And there's a whole different set of stuff rather than on homelessness in terms of what we're trying to do there. And we know that homelessness doesn't sit alone, it sits in that much broader housing crisis. So Tracy, Lee and I have set up a housing task force of senior people from across the council. David is one of those members, Matt and Jackie, but other people from commissioning and policy and planning and public health and all sorts of others who have an interest in housing being good to try and come up with solutions. It's predominantly a CMT, SMT and departmental SLT membership. So it's senior members of the council team coming together to look at that housing crisis in the round. We started focusing on homelessness, but we are looking at other things as well. So measures we're doing include working with providers to create specialist emergency accommodation to meet different needs for single people, couples, young people and families, providing the right support for people at the most challenging time. We're working providing loans, and you might have seen that both Path and Young Devon have received loans from us in order that they can develop temporary housing stock. So we're actually trying to support the local voluntary and community sector and social enterprises to come in and grow their own businesses with our funding to help us. We're looking at longer term solutions through the council strategic housing function. There are currently more than 40 housing developments being supported by that team, and 3,000 homes currently in the pipeline. Quite a lot of those affordable, maybe not the levels we would like to see, but a lot of affordable housing in the pipeline under construction or being prepared for construction at the moment. So we are making some progress, and there is actually a lot more to come. So we'll talk about quite a lot today, but we've got other stuff that we're not yet able to talk about in the pipeline that as it comes forward will be put on the forward plan and you'll be able to see. And there's one item gone on the forward plan in the last few weeks that we are expecting a decision at Cabinet in December. Mark and I have a meeting with Jackie tomorrow to go through business cases and check that we're ready to go. So there is more to come that we're not yet ready to go in the public domain, so please bear with us on that. We're very happy to come back on those. So this is really a big, tough one. You've all got the paper, but we thought what we might do is ask Jackie to run through basically one of the presentations we've made to the Housing Task Force to get discussion at that senior level in the council, so you can get to see, talked through some of the complexity of the report, because the report does contain a lot, and we just thought you might like to see the sorts of things we're doing with people like Tracy and David and Gary Warbridge and others to actually get our heads around what it is and some of the solutions. So I'm going to pass on to Jackie, who's got a presentation, which I think Hannah is going to get onto screens.
I'm grateful, and before we jump into that presentation, I'm notoriously poor at timekeeping, and I allow people, yourself, Councillor Penberthy, to talk far too long and not allow enough time for members to raise questions. So I'm glad you paused there. I look forward to Jackie's presentation. And then if you must sum up, please do so incredibly briefly. I'd rather members have this opportunity. Thank you. Well, thank you for keeping it so brief. It's very refreshing. Thank you. Jackie, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. Councillor Penberthy covered a lot of the points that are in here, but I just really wanted to pull to the fore some of the more salient points within the report. It is quite a long report, just to be able to speak to those. In particular, moving to the first slide, that national and local context that was discussed. The impact of COVID-19 cannot be underestimated. There you go. Oh, I do apologise. It's okay. And the impact that's had on unemployment, health and well-being, and actually really resonates when we're seeing people coming through the front door and the way their lives have changed, presented as homeless. That increase in utility costs, which we are all suffering with up and down the country, the increased inflation and the mortgage rates, increased rents, and that cost of living crisis. Locally, that absolutely translates also. The increase in presentations at risk of homelessness, or actually homeless, and that complexity of need is really evident in the reasons people are presenting. Most significantly in Plymouth, we have a reducing, it says reducing, actually it's reduced. Affordable being the key word, private rented sector market. Working with South West landlords, working with our estate agent partners, they anecdotally have lost about a third of their previous clientele. The landlords are exiting the market. There's a number of reasons for that. Either the rents, the costs are being passed on through the rents, so the rents are becoming unaffordable because landlords need to be able to afford to continue with the business, or they're completely exiting the market, either looking for more lucrative income via Airbnb or bed and breakfast, nightly paid accommodation, holiday lets, or just getting out of the game, cashing in at this point and not wanting to be in there any longer. I mentioned in the paper the reforms bill that's going through and the impact that is potentially having on landlords, and that's anecdotal from South West landlords to us. It's making landlords very nervous in terms of what that means for them in the future. So they are looking to potentially get ahead of the game and move out of the market. The low local housing allowance rates that were discussed, it's so impactful in that people cannot afford the rents in the local area. Let's say a search on Rightmove will show you there are no affordable rents at the moment. If you put in anything in the local housing allowance rates, there are no properties available. The student market skews that a little bit, but not enough to say there is actually property available at that rate. There isn't. The reduced delivery of social housing is impacted exactly as Councillor Penberthy said. It's about the viability of the build. It means it's really difficult for our RP partners to make projects viable for them to progress, and often then looking to us, the local authority, to be able to support with that. So the way we see that translate, and have seen that translate on the next slide over the last few years, you can see there the numbers just setting out for the last 3 years, 21, 22 up to the present year, the numbers presenting for homeless advised and as homeless, and then the numbers in bed and breakfast, and most importantly the families in bed and breakfast. You'll see that by this time of year in 23-24, we're already on a trajectory for about 4,000 people this year presenting as homeless or at risk of homelessness. You'll see the households in bed and breakfast is significantly high. The families in bed and breakfast significantly high. What this document doesn't show is the fact that on top of that, there's almost an equal number of families in holiday lets, nightly paid accommodation. So again, just showing the number of families that are coming through and that we're having to find alternative accommodation for, which is having a significant impact on the budget, as you would expect. And then just moving on, those reasons for presentation are really important. We talked about the reducing private rented sector market. That's section 21 notice at the top. That's a no fault eviction. That is landlords serving notice to people to move from the property, generally because they're selling up or they're doing renovations and then re-letting to the market. When people present with section 21, we speak to the landlord to understand what the situation is for them, to see if there is any way we can delay an eviction, avoid an eviction completely. Is there anything alternative that can be done? The family and friends no longer are able, willing to accommodate. That's a knock-on that we've seen really since the pandemic. A lot of households moved in together and supported each other throughout that period, and that goodwill runs out at points where if the goodwill runs out or the financial impact of that is so much a factor that can no longer be sustainable. So a lot of people presenting as family and friends no longer able or willing to accommodate. Again, we explore what the reasons for that are. Is there something that's needed? Is it a case of you need bunk beds instead of a single bed? Do you need more storage? Is it a shed in the garden? You know, all the alternative ways to try and sustain people in the accommodation that they're in, rather than going into bed and breakfast, because we know how that impacts on people's health. That is done. Fleeing domestic abuse, unfortunately, there has been a rise. There is been some excellent campaign in the city over the last 2 or 3 years, and that will have impacted the number of people. So if people are suffering domestic abuse, we absolutely want to see them presenting. It's still a very sad state of affairs with that number, but it is one of the top 3 there. There's a longer list in the paper, but I've just the top 15 there, and as you read down, you can see the numbers, the reasons are quite varied, but really quite impactful as well. And then, just moving on to the next slide, our response. So we continue to work with the Plymouth Alliance partners to sustain and increase the temporary accommodation that we already commission. So we have commissioned since the Alliance the Plymouth Alliance, bringing together 25 contracts across homelessness support, substance misuse and mental health support since 2019. They've worked with us, PATH, BCHA, other partners, to increase the number of rooms. So we do already have 511 rooms for single homeless accommodation and 85 family homes. It's not enough. Even the increase that we've worked on isn't enough to keep up with the pace of the increase demand. The Housing Task Force has been spoken about, and then there is the Homelessness Recovery Board, that multi-agency partnership, looking at those 4 pillars of activity. And I've just briefly listed over the next few slides some of the activity within that, just to give a flavour of that, if I can just speak to that. So the first pillar is to reduce that demand for homelessness services. So working with the Alliance, realigning some of that support. Previously, part of the Alliance services was to work with people who are at risk of homelessness and find them alternative accommodation to move on to. Unfortunately, that alternative accommodation doesn't exist anymore. So they're working with us from that front door perspective, trying to work with people to keep them in, sustaining those accommodations that they're in, whatever that need might be. We are stringently monitoring and managing the approaches to the front door, making sure that it is those people who are in priority need who are accessing that emergency accommodation and the support. We are using the Household Support Fund and the Homelessness Prevention Grant differently. Some of the things I've just spoken about, trying to understand what it is that people want and need to sustain where they are currently. And there is a number of packages of support that have been put together to just try and intervene as early as possible. We've worked with Young Devon to bring on some additional property for young people, with Trevi to bring on some female-only accommodation, and with some crisis beds, some much-needed crisis beds. They're all coming online, as you see, over the next couple of months. 14 additional homes through a new partner with Cornerstone, which is actually bringing family housing online, much needed. And then additional 10 family homes working with one of our registered provider partners, where they're looking to regenerate, and actually in the interim we can access those homes as temporary accommodation for families. Third pillar is creating that more sustainable move-on service, working with the housing delivery team and our partner BCHA at trying to deliver some modular units, which were family homes. That's quite advanced. 75 rooms in houses of multiple occupation, working with existing providers. There's a number of existing providers in the city providing what we call exempt supported accommodation, so with some support, which is very much where we've got single homeless with the complexity of need. It's what is needed to enable them to move on in a supported way. They're already in the city. We are working with them in a different way now to pivot some of those units towards homelessness. It's working well, and it is moving, again, not at the pace we'd like it to, but there is some additionality each month, which is great. And then finally, the increase in long-term housing. So deliver the existing housing developments, working with Plymouth Community Homes around the properties, the Allington home properties they brought online, to get those back in and see how we can perhaps work with them to bring on temporary accommodation. We developed the family temporary accommodation at Raglan Court. That's the Plymouth City Council owned accommodation. BCHA are working with us around the local authority housing fund, which was particularly facing towards the resettlement schemes around Afghan and Ukraine, to develop homes for families there, and 2 of those are temporary accommodation units as well. And then, yeah, well, that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Very helpful. Thank you for that overview. Members, over to you for questions. I have on the list Councillor Poison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Chris and Jackie for those presentations. Quite a stark situation we face ourselves in nationally, isn't it? I just want to say thank you to yourself and all the officers that are working hard to try and address these issues. I mean, a lot of these particular day-to-day issues for individuals and the housing crisis they're facing is, you know, I can't imagine what some of these families are going through. So, given this is a national crisis, what support has there been from national government in terms by way of funding over the last 12 months, 24 months? And is there anything coming down the line in terms of funding that you can see that could potentially support the council?
I'll kick off, and I think Jackie and Matt will pick up. One of the issues we face in homelessness is the homelessness prevention grant tends to be an add-on last-minute thought. Over the last couple of years, it's managed to be a whole year. It used to come through in dribbles during the year. So we don't know yet what next year's will be, but we do get a homelessness prevention grant, and then during the year we'll get little bits of top-ups on, oh, we've just spotted this is an issue. For us, the big problem is that we commission services through the Alliance, and we set up a programme, and then we continue trying to tweak it around the government programming. It'd be really helpful for government to be able to say, look, we'll give you this over the next 5 years to tackle homelessness, because it would enable us to plan and deal with prevention work and take much longer term views, rather than, oh, here's another £75,000 to do this with this. Now we react to that, and that does come in. And there are some pretty big programmes at the moment. So SHAP is a big programme that's coming in, I think, that we talked about. But I think we do get money, but we are also putting in money. In terms of bed and breakfast, there are all sorts of weird rules about housing benefit rates, but the budget you see with us that we are overspending by £2.4 million is after all of the government support for bed and breakfast accommodation, pay-by-night accommodation. That's the bit that's left for the council to deal with because of the rising numbers of people addressing us. 5 years ago, our budget for that was £800,000. It's now in the region of 6 million. And that's the quantum scale that we have had to pick up between us, and why actually we're not doing this because of the budget. The budget is definitely driving some of it. It's 180 households in bed and breakfast, and even more in pay by night, and even more in temp, for whom there are lots of ongoing long-term issues on employment, education, health and well-being, family breakdowns that we want to try and tackle. But there are other bits of government. But I just wanted to give you that big context that we're getting a lot, but we're actually putting in a lot more than the government is giving us to tackle this issue.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a supplementary. Thank you for that explanation. So, just looking at where we've how this issue has grown over the last 2 to 3 years. If we were to, we'd love to completely address homelessness and eradicate it, wouldn't we? That would be the ideal. But just getting back to where we were 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, what cost would we need, and support would we need to try and address our current situation? What additional costs? What kind of figures are we talking about?
Well, you saw the figures for temporary accommodation, not bed and breakfast there. So we need that number of new homes in the city just to account for that. We've then got similar numbers of, another sort of 300 households, or sort of 250, 300 in pay by night. So we need accommodation for that, and we know there's more on the route. So could we say, what would it cost us to build another 800 homes in the city fast? Plan for Homes delivered that over a period of years with over £10 million worth of our investment and a lot more on long term. In terms of the temp accommodation, we are looking at tens of millions of pounds, which is why I've said we're preparing business cases and we'll be prepared to come back to you with some. We're also working very hard with partners. So things like Raglan Court, where we own the building, BCHA as a registered provider is able to lever money. So it's really complicated as to how we put all of those packages together. But my guess is if you were to give me, as Cabinet Member for Housing, on direct delivery and homelessness, £100 million, we might tackle them now. But what we haven't talked about is the fact the waiting list has gone from 8 to 12,000 in the last 18 months. So there's also that latent demand that isn't yet in the homelessness system, but there's a whole load of people who are pretty close to being in it. So it's not a cheap fix, and it does need government intervention at that sort of scale, because there's no way we can generate all of that ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Bright.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. I just have a question. On page 6 of your report, you're talking about the rise in the number of households needing support, and you actually refer to floating support. I was just interested in what that actually meant. Could you give some examples of that?
Yes, certainly. In commissioning the Alliance, there is supported accommodation, which means the support is attached to the building, it's within the accommodation, and then we have outreach support, and that is the floating support. So it's support that will go to where the person is that needs the support, whether that be in bed and breakfast to try and sustain it, whether it be in their own home to try and sustain their own home. So we've developed a family support outreach team because of the number of families we've got in temporary accommodation currently. And also there is single homeless temporary accommodation support as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Gosling.
Thank you very much, Chair. So in this report and in many other reports that I've heard, the rise of homelessness is, some of the attribution to the rise of homelessness is coming for the shrinking of the rental market by landlords going out of that particular business line. But I presume that landlords that are selling up are not demolishing their homes behind them, and that, so the housing stock, I would have thought, would remain constant, and therefore if people are buying those homes from landlords, they're either going into the rental business themselves, or they're buying as residents, in which case they're leaving their being a renter. So can you explain why it is that, considering that their housing stock would remain the same, how are the changes to the use of the housing stock really affecting the homelessness market? A bit more detail.
It's very, very complicated. Some will be bought up by another landlord who will let. So it stays in the private rented sector. Doesn't necessarily stay in the affordable private rented sector, because if the new landlord does the house up and then lets, it could be a more market rent, and the market rents are going up a lot. We are seeing people moving to the city because of the change in working patterns, which means that actually people locating out of the southeast down to the southwest, because they can work from home more, or out of other places. So we are getting people moving into the city for that. Sadly, relationships break down. A relationship breakdown means that now we need 2 homes, not 1. And so that takes a demand, and you could see the number there of both violent and non-violent relationship breakdowns, just what that means on homelessness at that extreme end, where people don't need to come and resort to working with us. That has an impact on housing. And the other one, we've talked a lot about pay by night, Airbnbs. Airbnb use is rising in Plymouth, and we are seeing properties converted from rented properties for family homes to rented properties for pay by night, whether that's, and we're talking to Airbnb owners, and some of whom are now coming down quite a lot on their rents to be just about affordable, and some people are going quite a lot. So, you know, I've been quite open book and said, this is how much it costs me to have the property. As long as I can wash my face, you can use it. We're paying them less than half that they were getting from people on temporary contracts at the university, at the dockyard, and so on, who want to come and rent somewhere for a few months, and also the holiday let market. So we are seeing a change in the way that the private rented sector stock in Plymouth was used. One of the reasons it's hitting Plymouth hard is that our housing mix is unusual for a city of our size. We have low levels of owner-occupier compared to most cities. We have higher levels of registered providers than most cities, and substantially higher levels of private rented. So we've actually got a lot of people in the city for whom their entire life is spent in private rented sector, and that's their norm. And so a shrinking in the sector actually has a bigger impact here than it might have in other cities. So there's lots, it's complicated, and it's not easy to pin down, but all of those, if it was just one, we could cope with it. The fact it's a multitude of things actually makes it really difficult.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Ricketts, did I see you put your hand up, or did I imagine that? Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, thanks for all your efforts. It's a complicated area. As you go through each particular subject title, it's every situation there is complicated. It's not a simple situation. Just in some of these, what sort of things are we talking about within other? What sort of situations? On page 5.
So that's something that we need to get underneath and want to sort out in this reporting. Some of this is driven by government. So if how somebody's presenting, as you say, because every situation is different, doesn't fit one of these categories, it'll be listed as other. What that doesn't help us with is understanding what other is. And it's quite high up there, isn't it? So it's something that we are working to get underneath and try to eliminate completely, because it's not helpful as trying to understand it moving forwards.
And on fleeing harassment, is that local or is that from other countries? Is that a local situation with harassment?
Yeah, I haven't got case by case details, but yes, it is local. It'll be fleeing harassment. If that's bordering on violence, it could be from another area, but doesn't tend to be from other countries. It tends to be locally and in the neighbourhood, or from family relations or similar.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Poyser, I believe you have another very brief question.
Just very, very briefly, thank you, Chair. Just in relation to resourcing within council teams, obviously when dealing with homelessness, people are really struggling, aren't they? They need an element of compassion and time to navigate the system, point people in the right direction, and I imagine there's a lot of complex needs out there. Are we resourced? I.e., do we have any vacancies within our teams at the moment, or within the Alliance, to undertake the task at hand at the present moment?
I'll kick off. I've recently visited all the chief execs of the Alliance partners. It's really difficult to recruit people. The wages we can offer in this field are not enormous, and it is extremely stressful work. So there is quite a lot of churn for both of those reasons, and they're all continually. If you look at Path and Harbour and Hamos and BCHA, there's always recruitment going on in the city, and they're all working together. So we'll get a bit more reflection, I'm sure, from Matt and Jackie on our own teams. Yesterday I was in New George Street. The staff teams are absolutely amazing. Everyone I meet in, both ourselves and our partners, the compassion and actually the lengths of service people do, increasingly I think the frustration that they can't fix the problems anymore. A few years ago, they could have found someone in the private rented sector, they could move people on. It was happening over a few weeks and months. Now it's happening over months and years. And I just want to pay tribute to them publicly here. Matt and Jackie can talk about some of the things that are happening where we are carrying vacancies, but also some of the restructuring and different ways we're working to help fill those voids.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Penberthy, because it is really worth noting how hard staff are working. This is the most probably the most difficult time to have ever worked in homelessness. Jackie and I have been doing it for a fair while, and staff are really feeling it. So there's lots of work to do around their well-being. It does lead to more vacancies. The kind of attrition rate is higher than it would be for a lot of services. There's a lot of short-term funding in the city, so you asked about government funding earlier. That short-term funding leads to temporary contracts, so the Alliance will have a number of temporary contracts going all the time, which end, and so I think it is the most difficult. I think our resourcing is okay. We've done some work. We're going through a restructure as we speak, and that has led to more resources in the team. We've structured it differently, and we're confident that we can do the work that we need to do at the moment. I think the challenge is that we've also got some short-term funding, so a lot of my service is now grant funded by using the money that comes in from government. That funding is always at risk. So we have to be aware that there are always chances that if funding comes to an end, how we then resource that staff team is going to be a challenge. So it's just worth reflecting that.
And Chair, can I just quickly, on that basis, Matt, David and I have lots of conversations. We are working on the assumption that government is not going to overall cut the budget, so we make some assumptions about it being there, and that's built into budget forecasts for the future.
As is the nature of this grant funding, nothing's guaranteed, and the certainty of that in the future. I have Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. Yeah, it's on this sort of uncertainty nationally. Question probably for Chris. As of this week, we're now on our 7th housing minister since 2020 alone. Do you think that adds to the uncertainty coming out nationally?
I was going to do a sum yesterday afternoon when I spotted a social media graphic that we were on our 16th housing minister since 2010. One of whom actually did the job, a couple of whom have done the job for more than a year, which actually gives a sense of the transience in that particular role. If you were to compare that to local government, where we've had substantial numbers of administrative changes, there are very few of us who've taken that role here in Plymouth. It would be good maybe for government to have a look and see how local government has much more security of tenure of roles and expertise built in cabinet roles. It does make a difference. Getting your head around this sort of brief isn't quick. It's one of the things we've learned with the Housing Task Force, bringing people up to speed, even people who are peripherally engaged. I think, David, you'd acknowledge this. Once you start delving into it, it's not easy. Our housing ministers have to deal with a lot more. We could really do with some stability from all governments in how they manage cabinet reshuffles, because if we did that here locally, the council would really struggle. No matter whether we agree or not with policies, actually we just need to have that sense of we know where we're going, we know what we're working with. I hope that maybe until the next general election, we do not get another change of housing minister. That would give us longer than we've had for quite a long time in terms of security.
I was content to indulge that almost briefly. We leave politics very much at the door, but I think the point was made. Consistency and certainty in terms of our grant funding going forward would be very much welcomed. I have a very simple question. In terms of the Homelessness Recovery Board, could you just briefly outline who does that involve in terms of that board, please?
So the Homelessness Recovery Board is chaired by myself. Obviously Jackie's on it, and then there are a number of partners and internal. So we have the Service Director for Children, Young People and Family Services. We have some of our alliance partners on it. We have Live Well on it. And it's about trying to get everybody involved in delivering some of the things that we're trying to deliver to improve outcomes.
And I noticed from your presentation, Jackie, which I was very grateful for, and I echo the comments of those who respect greatly the efforts our staff, our teams are going to deal with this issue that's not exclusive to Plymouth or the South West, but undertaking the work they do in the circumstances they do without those certainties and guarantees of funding. Hats off to them. In terms of the slides you showed, it is encouraging to see, particularly with the numbers you were discussing fleeing domestic abuse, it's really pleasing to see that the downward trend it's a consistent downward trend on that line alone, and that's really encouraging given the nature of the purpose of fleeing domestic abuse. So long may that continue and pick up pace going forward. So that's really helpful, and it was also really encouraging to note that we've now joined up young children and adult social care in terms of looking at homelessness together, whereas previously that was separated. So I think that's a great introduction, which it's a bit more joined up because they're dealing with the same issues, but affecting different scales in that regard. I think that's very encouraging to see as well. I don't have any other speakers on my list.
I just quickly say one of the big benefits of that is on a Friday at 3 o'clock, Community Connections don't get all the problem cases that adult social care and children's social care, because of their pressures, then say, well, Community Connections can deal with them for the weekend. There's been a lot more joined up, a lot more person focused, which is what the Alliance work has done. And I think us bringing it in line has been really welcome.
I think you're right to recognise that. Friday afternoon, that was passported to somebody else, and it was their problem to deal with. And that's really encouraging to see that now being joined up. So thank you. Thank you very much. Really interesting presentation. We're grateful for your attendance today. Thank you. Members, the recommendation is that Performance, Finance and Customer Focus Overview and Scrutiny note that report. Thank you. This brings us to agenda item number 7, the work programme. And the committee is asked to consider its work programme. Over to you, Hannah, at this point.
I have updated it following the previous agenda set. We obviously spoke to you and fleshed out the agenda for February, which obviously hopefully you've all had a chance to have a read of. Obviously, if there's anything else that anyone would like to add, but I have tried to update it as best I can, including, for example, the future bereavement services update. I've spoken, that was on the future for possibly this year, but having spoken to Graham Smith, he said the first meeting of next year would be perfect. So I'll schedule it for them.
That's great. I'm grateful. That's duly noted. Thank you. And tracking decisions, again, agenda item 8. Anything to add at this stage, Hannah?
Through you, Chair, as you can see from the record, I have been chasing the action from July's meeting relating to HR and OD. I'm expecting to be able to send you an update this week, but
Well, this week would be encouraging.
Yes.
You've been chasing it for some time, so we all wait in anticipation for that. Thank you very much. Unless there are any questions, members, that is also duly noted. That takes us to the end of our agenda. Opportunity for any other business, members. In the absence of any, thank you very much for your attendance, and I bid you the rest of the evening. Thank you very much for your time.